Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Witlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Witlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.witlingo.com. That's www.witlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
Professor Ebrahim Moosa, Professor Fawzia Afzal-Khan, if I'm pronouncing correctly, and Professor Tom Ginsberg, thank you very much for making the time, and welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you for inviting us.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on your bios. They will be posted when we post this podcast. Just know, everyone, that Professor Ebrahim is from Notre Dame. Professor Afzal-Khan is from Montclair State University. And Professor Ginsberg is from University of Chicago. Okay, so the context of this conversation is important. I think there's a sort of a narrative and a story that sort of at the meta level explains or gives us an insight into what's going on. I bumped into an op-ed written on December, 10th, by Professor Claire Finkelstein on the Washington Post. And when I read it, I was sort of like amazed that, first of all, the Washington Post would publish that piece, because it was not cogent, it was not coherent, it was hysterical. And perhaps, sometimes there's a reason why people publish that, just to show that what's the state of mind of some folks who are being very reactionary. So I was just amazed that it was there, and the mainstream media was echoing sort of that kind of a voice where, okay, if you are protesting for the Palestinians, you are anti-Semitic, and it became a thing, right? Became a thing, and it was not challenged, and you can see CNN folks just basically taking it for granted that there is currently anti-Semitic protests all over the country. Obviously, Fox News went the extra mile, and MSNBC, that's supposed to be sort of on the left, didn't do anything with it in terms of being critical. It just became a thing, and I said to myself, we need to react to that. So I reached out to, as I was saying in the introduction to the collection of essays that I'll talk about shortly, I contacted basically almost 100 professors and academics and so on. Initially 70, right? And then after your help, it came to 100. And it took that much of an effort to get initially just 2 out of the 70 that I contacted who said, I will write. And there were 2 more who said, I will write. And then they wrote something. And then at the last minute had cold feet and took it back. And somebody who promised to write decided to not write. Okay. So these are people who are adult academics, right? They should have a sense of pride, right? And yet there was a massive fear, right? And it's not like the piece was, was tight, and so you had to negotiate your way to be critical about it. It's a loose piece. It's just, it says things that don't make sense. It's hyperbolic. So one can easily come from many angles that, going out on a limb to criticize it. And so question number 1 for you guys is, how do you explain this demonstrated actually fear, right, to engage in a topic that has to do with free speech in the context of these demonstrations? And I'll start with you, Tom, since you're always at the last because you're your name.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having us, by the way. The way I think about this is Israel-Palestine is a topic on which people have really strong feelings, often unencumbered by any historical knowledge. And it's really important in U.S. politics, and U.S. politics are changing. And it's something where we really have seen, obviously, now something we really have never seen before. So first of all, I divided it into 3 stages, actually. First, we had October 7th, October 8th, let's say, when, genuinely, from my perspective, people were saying some horrible things. And we saw some celebrations which were totally inappropriate, and some of them indeed anti-Semitic as well as anti-Zionist. Those are separate things, but you can be both. But then, of course, 2 or 3 days later, we begin to see the consequences of that, including people getting fired for tweets that they did, people getting fired for calling for a ceasefire eventually. I mean, really hard restrictions, not really by the state, but by the private sphere. And that was highly repressive and has led to, I think, the fear, which made it so hard for you to find people to write for this. But that's, as you say, not right and not rational. And we have to take the freedom of speech we have in this country. We have to defend it. That's my mission in some sense. I want to mention the third phase, which is once we got to that university president's appearance in December 5th. Mm-hmm. Now what's going on has nothing to do with Israel and Palestine or anti-Semitism. This is major U.S. politics, going for DEI. So it's metastasized in a complex way.
That's I mean, the context of the U.S. Political atmosphere right now is important to parse that. Fawzia, what are your thoughts? Like, why was there such fear, right? I think we all know, but why to that extent where 2 out of 70 people said I will write? And these are philosophy professors, most of them, if not all, tenured, right? Tell me.
Well, thanks, yes, for having us on and organizing this. I think it's very important that we really talk about this and think it through, because, of course, as Tom also suggested, this is, in terms of academic freedom, setting an extremely dangerous precedent, which we haven't quite seen to this, certainly not to this degree ever before. And so I think that's part of the response, right? Is that if people, and you're not getting more than 2 people to respond out of this large list of people who do usually respond to your request to come on and to talk about various and sundry things, this you see, and this has always and thus been so, but it has become ever more so, precisely because of the kinds of extreme actions that Professor Ginsberg also pointed out are occurring. People being fired, people being let go, people being doxxed, people being, simply for asking for a ceasefire, simply for stating that Palestinians are human beings who have rights. This has somehow, become, and this is where something that I want to say is that I think what's not different is the equation of anti-Zionism or a criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism. That is very, very deep in the psyche and in the political culture and in the academic culture of the United States. It has always and thus been so. That is not new. And those of us, especially in academia, who have spoken out against Zionist, interventions and Zionist history and, Zionist attacks on Palestine over the, since the middle of the last century, those of us who teach Palestinian history, who teach Palestinian literature, we have, no matter which institution we're at, to lesser or more degree, have always been targeted. I mean, in the case of Joseph Massad, for example, before him, Edward Said was the professor of terror. So I think, that is simply not new. What is new is the extent and degree of fear, as you pointed out, and that is because it is in direct correlation also, right, to the fact that people more than ever before, this is the paradox, are coming out. This includes students. I've never seen students on our campuses so mobilized in wanting to learn that history, in wanting to, take a side that is morally correct side. That has just never happened before, including by many, many, many Jewish students. So that has made the atmosphere of repression stronger, because I think the powers that be are really afraid. They see the sea change that is happening, at least at the level of public opinion on and off our campuses. And so, the pushback is very strong. And that is what has made a lot of people very scared. And obviously, we have seen that even presidents of major universities can be gotten rid of. I mean, on some absurd allegations, which they were themselves unable to defend. I mean, that was a circus. And so I think all of this goes into answering that question, very important question that you raised. I think the fear has always been there. People have generally always been afraid to speak out, but now more so. And yet at the same time, from those, like our students, we see much more of a pushback. And that to me is encouraging.
Okay, wonderful. So let's see, Ebrahim, do you think that this is sort of a consequence? And I think I'm backing on Tom's point. Do you think this is because the last few years we've seen in various campuses folks who are not towing the orthodox line, the new liberal orthodox line, right? LGBTQ plus, right? Minorities. There's a narrative that you have to subscribe to, and if you don't, if you come from the right, then you are basically shut down, right? So sort of we have been building this muscle of shutting people down, right? And here we are, where now it's not a minority or a small group, but the majority of the students on campus, actually, I think, from the campuses that I've seen, a big chunk of folks, all hues, are now pushing against the established narrative. The established narrative is Israel is the victim, and they are only reacting. So, do you think, Professor Ebrahim Moosa, do you think that's part of the explanation as to why all of a sudden we have this toxic brew where we stand today as far as free speech on campus?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think Professor Ginsberg is right in saying that there's been a long history of this attempt to try and manage speech at campuses by the right and sometimes by elements in the left and so on. But I think we have to look at this event on October 7 in the context of geopolitics and also in the context of the United States and Israel's historic relationship and the media's, always being a very pro-United States media on this issue. So first of all, October 7 was a massive attack in Israeli psyche, and also for anybody on the outside watching this. This was the first time people who have been just pummeled into the ground in Gaza every 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. Israel goes, mows the lawn, dozens, hundreds of Palestinians get killed. Suddenly, for the first time in a long time, we've seen a Palestinian reaction on this organized scale, and obviously the casualties and the hostages, right? So that played big. I spoke to a university president who I asked him, I said, why did you sign on to a yeshiva university signature campaign and so on? His first reaction was that, well, the hostages and children were taken. Okay. So that element was very quickly played up. And especially for university presidents and people in administration who don't pay attention to Middle East issues like you and I do, because I teach Islamic studies. The Middle East is always in my purview. The Palestinian issue in my purview. They don't understand that, so they don't know, how many Palestinian kids have been killed, how many Palestinians have been arrested, how many women and children have been killed in the past. For them, this is a big thing, and the media spun it. So it was a combination of hysteria and shock. It's a combination of hysteria and shock, and the establishment was rocked, right? And you can see that in the way in which establishment, how the White House responded, how Biden responded. using very, very reductionist understandings that Hamas is only there, they only want to kill Jews. That's their only very purpose. That is not true of Hamas or any of the Palestinian groups. It just happens that their adversaries are Jewish. If they were Armenian, they would have been the same. If they were anybody else, it would be the same. Because this is a struggle for a homeland, for a state, for survival. And I come from South Africa, and I fully understand, how the struggle operates. Except that the struggle in South Africa was very unbalanced. You had a very, very powerful state, and the ANC and the liberation movements in South Africa had very little military power within the context because it could fight as the South African army on the borders. So I think this question we fully need to fully appreciate that the nature of American politics, the power of the Israeli lobby, the way in which, and the unexpected thing was that at universities like Harvard, 23 odd student organizations within 24 hours issue a statement blaming Israel, right? This is unexpected in American politics, that student groups can organize and react in that way. And what it signals to the establishment, university establishment, education establishment, that something has changed in our country. Something has changed in our country. Who are these people who can issue these statements without following the line that we have been trying to show, that Israel is the only civilized country in the Middle East, as everybody says, and everybody else is in a dangerous place. Israel is the tip of our spear, as Nikki Haley says. There we go. So this was a shock to the national culture.
Yeah.
In terms of the reaction. And that shows you that there's been a demographic change within universities and generational change. Now you have Jewish kids protesting. I mean, Jewish kids protesting at the scale and the level and at the level of media attention, that to the extent that the media is trying to suppress it, yet they are getting the attention because of social media and other ways. So I think we fully need to appreciate the American context of this event.
Yeah. So I definitely agree that this was I think a monumental sort of shift on many levels, right? So first of all of a sudden, these Palestinians are not animals that will endure anything and everything. They will react, when you push them too far. So that's a revelation that they're actually people who actually resist, right? But number two, I think, is the reaction from the campuses and beyond, right? Not just campuses, like these demonstrations, not just students out there in every single city, right? So the question then becomes, and I think we know the answer, but I would love to, Tom, let me ask you, why are we seeing the level of commitment? And I've never seen, I mean, the Black Lives Matter last maybe 2-3 months. This is going on. It's gonna go on and on and on, I think, for a while. I mean, yesterday, Biden was interrupted 12 times in Virginia here, 12 times, right? By these protests, right? So good luck with his campaign. But why are they so informed, so engaged, and so committed to the cause, so to speak? It feels to me.
Well, first of all, the big context, which is relevant for your last question as well, is this is a new era because of social media. Yeah. Everyone is afraid of speaking out in a time of social media, students, faculty, etc. But it's also the case that information travels very rapidly. So I think the Israeli response to October 7th, which is basically trying to turn Gaza into, Chechnya, into Grozny, and it's just being broadcast on these kids' social media 24/7. That's the reason it's going on. If they had done a couple strikes or something like that, and then we'd be over it by now. But they have kept pushing, and that's why it will go on. I'm not sure, by the way, that it's so informed from my perspective. I don't think they say that half the kids protesting can't tell you what river or sea they're denouncing.
Well, they're informed. Let me just say they're informed in the sense that they have a sense of the damage that's being caused. I think they're informed at that level. But go ahead.
I think it's exactly actually kind of a product of actually I'm really happy if this ends up, in a place where, we have two states and mutual self-determination, all that stuff. I really hope that happens, but I think it could get a lot worse before it gets better. And, one of the reasons is that, I just think, well, let's see. I just, think that there's a kind of simplistic narrative that is developed on campuses generally in the last few years, which is there are good people and bad people. There's oppressors and oppressed. Obviously, Palestinians are oppressed. That's objectively true. But thus, if I'm oppressed in X category, I must, be out there. And I think that's helped the mobilization.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing, which is the position of the university leadership, which is they've also gotten used to speaking out on every issue of the day. And that's why they got trapped, because what do you do when your campus is actually split? Or when your students are on one side and your faculty are on one side and the trustees are on the other side? They didn't know what to do, and they froze like deers in the headlights. And that's led partly to, I think, also a sense that the students aren't being served, because they see, if you're speaking out about the war in Ukraine, why aren't you speaking about the war on Gaza? So that's my view. But I also think I want universities to keep out of those things. I don't look to my president as
I was going to ask
leader.
you, how do you think that those hearings would have gone better, right, for these presidents, in terms both of what they could have said, but also how they should have behaved before for many years, right?
I'm from the University of Chicago. I have very strong views. We have this thing called the Calvin Report, which is that the university does not take positions on issues of the day. And that includes departments, by the way. I think it's also important that departments keep their mouths shut. And the theory is, if the university announces a position, it could be pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, but they're basically discouraging everyone else from learning, from inquiring, which is the mission of universities. So I think universities have gotten so far away from that kind of thing. They, like big corporations, they feel the need to speak out on X or Y.
Right.
And that's actually undermined our position in this society, and you see declining trust. So I'm really worried about it.
It's these universities are becoming corporations, for-profit corporations, and they behave like corporations. They have, I don't know, an order of magnitude more administrators than faculty, and so on and so forth. But you're not saying that professors themselves cannot take a stand, right? You're talking about. Of course not. Yeah.
No, the professors must or can take a stand, especially if they have expertise. It's the individuals can speak, even groups of individuals, but not universities, and importantly, not departments. There was a scandal this week about Barnard, where the Women's Studies Department had a statement taken down. I'm happy they were forced to take that statement down. It was a pro-Palestine statement, but the fact is, like, they're basically announcing an orthodoxy, and they control the graduate students and the professors. People are trying to get tenure. Oh, I can't look at that. There's one orthodox position. So I think we have to free all of the scholars, including our students who are scholars, to learn as much as they can. And that's why I take that position on neutrality, but it's been very unpopular until recently.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Fawzia, tell me, in terms of where you are now at university, because you've gone through attacks, right? First of all, did your, I don't know, tell me if you don't want to answer it, did university protect you? Was there protection in terms of your colleagues? Did they rally around you, or did they throw you off the, under the bus? Well, tell us a little bit about that experience, and maybe you can draw parallels with what's going on today for folks who speak up, and professors who get fired if they don't have tenure and
Right. It's, I mean, I can, one of the early examples that comes to mind is, when I was just an untenured faculty member and had just started my career at Montclair, Susan Sontag was the presidential speaker. We have this, one big thing every year, not anymore, but we used to. And so I remember going to that event, and she had been talking about something that didn't have to do with Israel Palestine, but really about the concept of the decade, and had taken Germany and Nazi Germany as a sort of an example, and then talked about had talked about the genocide of the Jews and so on. And she was analyzing what happened in the decade following the Holocaust and so on. But she never once mentioned Palestine or the creation or, what happened to native Palestinians in Israel and so on. So as a very brand new faculty member, I did raise my hand. I did, we had to go up and ask questions. And I asked a question just simply about that, as to whether somebody, if you're talking about something like that, a unit of, in this way, would it not behoove you to mention, if you're mentioning this, you also have to mention that. And, it turned into a complete circus. I mean, there was she got extremely angry at the question itself, and claimed that the tenor was all wrong. And afterwards, I do remember that a lot of people came up to me. There was some other untenured faculty from other departments who said, well, aren't you afraid? And this is going to affect you negatively. You're not yet tenured, and blah, blah, blah. And I was very naive, and I thought, why should that affect me? I'm doing my work. And I mean, surely this is the land of the free and freedom of speech and whatnot. And I didn't think that I had said or done anything at all worthy of being censored. But I do remember I was called aside. I was asked to appear to my chair at that, the chair of my department, who asked me why I had said that, and proceeded to try to educate me on, the chosen people and what that meant. And I should now read my Maimonides. And, it became really very subtle, not so subtle, but there was pressure. Let's just say that there was pressure put on me to, and then somebody took a stand and defended me because I was being attacked, and by various and sundry, they published something in our campus newsletter. And so this went on, but ultimately died down. Now, what was the result of all this was very interesting. This is before email, before the net, but I remember getting a ton of calls left on voicemail from people I had no idea, from all over the campus, who had been to this event, who had heard this, and who expressed gratitude, at least for the, expression of some reality that otherwise, as we've been discussing today, simply is not and has not been acknowledged. And that is where it connects with today, you see. I mean, I was given tenure, yes, but I had to fight for my promotion. There were little ways. And then because of the reputation that started to cement that day about, my political stance, my questioning, my challenging norms, whatever, I had to, 10 years I was denied a particular award that was given to people who didn't have anything close to my level of publications. And it was because the same person sitting as chair of that committee was a Christian Zionist, chair of the philosophy department, who said very clearly to me after 9/11 on a public university-wide discussion list, you should go back to the caves where you crawled out from. So while the administration did what I think Professor Ginsberg is suggesting, which is they didn't take sides overtly, right? They enabled an atmosphere, I'm sorry to say, where someone like myself with my credentials is not protected by various other individuals who sit on powerful committees who decide our fate in one way or the other. Thankfully, I got my tenure, but I had to fight for everything else. And I was sidelined and have been for, in many ways. My own department, for example, I have been going blue in the face, arguing for a hire in Arab American studies. We can see the changing demographics in the university. We border Edison. We are having more and more Arab and Muslim students enter the university. I have a course that I created on Muslim women. I mean, nobody is going to be able to teach that course once I retire, because there has been an absolute refusal to even engage with the idea that we might need somebody to develop and to teach, Arab American literature. And now we have students of all stripes. They're not just Arabs or Muslims. These are your average white student, Italian American, Irish American, Jewish American, whatever, African American students who want more diversity, who want to learn about the world, who want to learn the history of how we got to the moment that happened on October 7th. And they are learning a lot of this information thanks to social media, but they want to go in depth. They want to study this stuff. They want to be free to discuss this in these classes. And it is the Arab and Palestinian students who are not being protected today on our campuses. Yes, I mean, I think that for me now, towards the end of my career, after 37 some years in the profession, I've seen this resistance grow, which is fabulous, but I've also seen the tremendous administrative desire to control and to squash voices and to find different ways to control us in different institutions. I mean, I'm at a public university, so they cannot, do what they did in these private institutions. But do they not find other ways to punish and sideline you? Sure, they do. Sure, they do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That was good. Very informative. So, Ibrahim, you are a scholar on Islamic studies. Right? That's what you write about. You've written. I just read one of your articles about Al-Ghazali. Great article. I think we should share it with the rest of the folks here and the podcast. I'll put a link to it. So, have you sensed any change amongst your colleagues, any tension, because you're the face of, I don't know, you're a prominent person, right, over there. But have you sensed anything like that since October 7th?
No, I can't say anything, nothing personal and so on. Even, in fact, October 7th, and, I think the Israeli propaganda will like that. But, especially after 9/11, for instance, I can hardly say that I was subjected to any kind of discrimination. Maybe a kind of a look. I was at that time at Duke University. Maybe someone looked at me and I looked back hard. Okay, and when you're in university communities, you're always protected. People talk. Do people have difference of opinion? Absolutely, and these difference of opinion did. The difference between 9/11 is that everybody was shocked, including Muslim Americans, everybody else, because this was a massive attack. This was like attack on the homeland, and also the actors claimed to be Muslim of a particular kind, and now suddenly all of us had to explain Islam, right? So everybody was implicated, and gradually, you had to work your way out of that. And I think in some ways, what I learned out of 9/11 in terms of being able to. So, at first one had to, after 9/11, you had to gingerly treat the American audience to say, look, there's a good Islam and a bad Islam, the good Muslim, the bad Muslim version, right? It's not really a good strategy, because, so somebody is going to say they are bad Muslims too. But no one is going to, there are good Christians and bad Christians, good Jews and bad Jews. But somehow Muslims must, twirl themselves into that position in order to make this voice. So I think the story of October 7th or 9/11 or Islam in America, as a professor of Islam, all our policies and stuff, in the United States, when it comes to the Arab world, the Muslim world, it is very, very poorly informed. It is no proper education of our bureaucrats or people who take decisions. They go to war in Afghanistan and then in Iraq on the say-so or one or two academics that they call in. I always say, there's no society in the world, even better than Europe, than the United States, that has the expertise on everything in the Islamic world, from languages to complexity to diversity, can tell you how many gallons of water is going down the river Nile now, at what spot, can give you interpretation of the Quran, its all its complexity, Islamic law professors. Our universities are loaded. I mean, the resources here. But the people who are the least beneficiaries of this great learning and insight of the Islamic world with complexity is our government, the American public, right? We failed as the profession to get to them. Now I'm at the policy school. We're trying to do policy conversations to educate them. So I think you need to understand that the topic of October 7 and the cultures involved are, Islam is the big factor. Muslims are a big factor. Palestinians are Christians, secular and Muslim. There's a complexity of that, but the Islam thing is big. So this thing also plays through that issue. And I think, as most people in America have a very simplistic understanding of the Middle East politics, it's about Jews and Arabs and not that complexity of what Israel's history is, what Jewish people are all about. I think we're also the victims as a public in America of that kind of dumbing down of the issues. And I think Tom, pointed to that question. I think, one of the things that I value in American Academy is exactly this freedom of speech. And our universities are some of the best in the world. And no matter, we might find difficulty with it. One of the reasons I'm here in America in 1998, July 13, 1998, my house was bombed by Muslim militants in South Africa. Okay. Because I spoke out against a group that was trying to undermine our newfound democracy in South Africa. And they put a IED, explosive device, at my house. If I was at 15, 20 minutes later, myself and my two children, we could have been fatally, wounded or killed or worse. And obviously, the year before that, I had visited Stanford. So my colleague said, "Why didn't you just come back? We wanted you to stay for 3 years, and you just stayed one semester. So come back." That's how I ended here. So I fully appreciate one, and I understand the violence that religious discourse can inflict on people, and reduction of issues. And I fully also understand the value of freedom, because this body in front of you experienced those issues, and how important freedom of expression is, and what we're having. People like Finkelstein in her article is trying to limit that, and I think that's going to be extremely, destructive for the culture and the values we have tried to inculcate in American society. And if I'm angry at the fact that this is being politicized and is utilized in order to fulfill some kind of political objective. It's not because there's a fear that all students are being exposed to some kind of violence. I mean, things that I fear is my granddaughter going to school in Washington, and I worry about a shooter coming to that school. That's my biggest worry. I'm not worried about someone saying horrible things about Muslims and Arabs, or horrible things about Jews, and that they will be, they'll be killed on college campuses. I don't have that fear. There has been some attacks on college campuses, and I understand that, but that's by crazy people. But school shootings is a major issue. It's not because of any kind of politics, but because of people with mental health issues and so on. So I think I think that this question that you are worried about, that why did 70 of the people you contact not write on this issue? Because this issue is filled with a certain sense of gravity, of politics, of geopolitics, of issues that are of great sensitivity. The United States and of America was not directly involved, with the killings of millions of Jews in Germany, but anti-Semitism has been part of our culture. And people could not go to the certain places at Harvard and Yale for decades. People of Jewish background. So I think that is another legacy we are dealing with.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.